So the next question is, once again, imagine you're the great Smyslov, or maybe if you were Mikhail Tal, for somebody who you can relate to maybe a little bit with more familiarity, how can you attack the enemy king? And if you said just double the rooks in the d file, it's game over, you're being a little too simplistic. Now, if rook d2, king c8, you double, the bishop can now move to c6 or e8. Your attack comes to that end. You need to get your knights involved, guys. But the problem is knight e4, there's really no follow-up. This knight kind of stuck on e2. So this position requires more sacrifices, of course. f5, exclam, yet again. Unbelievable chess by Vasily Smyslov. Pawn takes. It looks as though black is dominating with these central pawns. Knight d5 though, tempo move with the queen. Queen f8. And now the star move of the game. Once I saw this move, I said to myself, Smyslov is no worse than Tal. He really has a good feel for dynamics. So again, there is no direct way to win the game. We need to get more pieces in the game. Doubling the rooks is a logical idea, but once again, king c8, and he slowly will run away. So the hint I'm going to give you guys is you want to get this rook into the game, but in a very unusual way. In such a way that when the king is on c8, you can still cause damage. Okay, so why don't you take a moment and figure this out? And another hint is the position calls for more sacrifices. That's right, more sacrifices are in order. And the move is g4 double exclam. What another pawn sacrifice, and a really unusual one. Because the rook actually wants to enter the game via h3 square, where it can do this, right, put pressure, or c3 and put pressure there. And now the whole strategy makes sense. And this is what I mean when I talk about attacking the uncastled king. Your opponent's rooks are so terrible that the fact that you're sacrificing pawns to open up files is actually only helping you. Okay, so what is he going to play? What is black going to play? Black plays a5, a very creative idea to get his own rook involved. I really like that move. But before we start looking at that move, first of all, let me mention that after pawn takes, this is pretty much game over, right? The rook is coming through and there is simply no defense. Okay, that's one possible line. Another possible line is f4, rook h3. Again, this pawn you can take, but you're walking into a very annoying discovered check, and then the rook can swing over to either d3 or c3. Looks pretty bad, right, guys? He can try it, but it's not really giving me a lot of confidence. And now, let's look at what he did in the game. Very creative move, I should say. And here Smyslov takes the pawn, which is not a bad move, but it does lose a pretty serious chunk of his attack. When I analyze this game with modern engines, they point a very interesting sequence, starting with the move knight b6. After pawn takes, queen e6, hitting the bishop, the sequence is rather forced. Queen e7, rook takes, rook d1, black has to give up the queen. And at first it looks like two rooks and a bunch of pawns, right? Especially these guys, is more than enough for the queen. But if you look at this position closely, you realize that, well, this king is quite open. The knight could come in rather quickly, and these pawns are pretty weak. Therefore, the computer will say white is close to winning. But for a human, it's not obvious. Not obvious at all. So Smyslov, what he does also makes sense, but it does give black some hope. Pawn takes, here comes the rook, f6, logical idea to get the queen back in the game. Rook takes, he had to take with the rook, guys. Okay, very important moment. What's wrong with bishop takes? Well, the answer is rather simple. You see how this is all pinned up rather badly? Rook f1, it's game over. You're going to lose a piece. or a queen. So he had to give up the exchange. But keep in mind, black has still 2 pawns and the bishop pair. The game is far from over. And here Smyslov makes another small inaccuracy. It looks like a very logical move. You block the pawn, you attack the b pawn, but more accurate was queen d3, putting extra pressure, not allowing the king to run away. Now black has to waste a huge tempo, right? Maybe queen e7 protecting the bishop. And here you can even swing the queen over, guys, to b5 using the pin, and that pawn is a goner. All right, so queen b4 maybe runs into mate. I mean, what other moves you have? b6, you can play rook takes, queen takes, rook d1. So I just don't see much way of surviving. I think he has to play king here, takes, and just kind of play this bad position. Anyway, Smyslov makes another inaccuracy, queen e4, king here, queen d5, bishop c6, queen takes b6, good play from black, queen a6, bishop back, queen c4, and here, guys, after queen c6, black is in serious trouble. He played really well defensive chess to survive this far, but going into the endgame, well, white doesn't have to take, but basically this is not the kind of move you want to play as black, because the queen can later invade. The key move is e4, and he probably didn't like knight c3 because this pawn is weak. But you can just keep pushing that pawn, and now you see what the 2 bishops are doing. They're opening up the game. As a matter of fact, modern engines such as Stockfish 12 tell me that this position is roughly equal. But of course, it's too complex, and either side can still lose. I prefer slightly white, but I do respect the bishops in this position. So yeah, a few inaccuracies there, and black could have gotten back into the game. Instead, after queen c6, queen f7, I really like that move. Bishop has to go to a very ugly square. And now Smyslov, with a couple of checks, activates his pieces. He wins the bishop. Queen takes g2, but who cares? Extra rook is extra rook. Bishop e4, another little tactic, but simply queen c8. Yeah, white is more or less converting this one, guys. Rook here, check. Queen e8, another cool idea. You see how he's using the queen to create really nice mating nets. Bishop c6 is forced, and he probably should have resigned. Instead, the game continued for a couple more moves, and finally, on move 41, he called it a day. Well, what can I say about this game? Smyslov played with incredible creativity, sacking his pawns left and right, open up the enemy king, and then this g4 move, extremely creative way to get the rook involved. But I should also point out that his opponent, a lesser known player, Kuzminykh, he actually played this a5 rook a6 idea quite cleverly, and he could have gotten close to full compensation, right guys, for the exchange with the 2 bishops and pawns, but he messed up with queen c6 and lost the game. So modern chess is very similar to this game. Both sides are being very creative when they're attacking and defending, and the side who plays the most accurate moves wins. But this is by far not modern game at all. 1951, very, very ancient game, yet it does teach us a lesson, guys. Study your classics. Thank you very much. This was Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn for chesslecture.com. Goodbye.